They called me a gold digger, until they saw my bank account. The name is Amelia Vance, and I have been called many things in my 27 years on this planet. Daughter, orphan, scholar, survivor, but the one that stuck, the one that was hurled at me like a weapon, was gold digger. It was a label that clung to me with the tenacity of cheap perfume, trailing behind me at charity galas, hissing through the whispers at business dinners, and following me like a persistent shadow in the tabloid headlines. They saw a young woman with a pretty face and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's annual salaries, draped on the arm of a man old enough to be her father. The assumption was as predictable as it was insulting. I was a trophy, a beautiful, empty vessel, trading my youth for his fortune. They never stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, I was the one with the fortune. My husband, Arthur Vance, was a titan of industry. A man whose name was synonymous with steel, shipping, and a fortune so vast it was measured in billions, not millions. He was 62 when we married, a widower with a salt and pepper beard, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a heart so generous it was almost a liability. Arthur was never the caricature of the lecherous old man with a young bride. He was my mentor, my friend, and eventually my partner. We met not at a cocktail party or a fashion show, but at a university lecture hall where I was a guest speaker on global economic inequality, and he was a distinguished alumnus. I had built my life on the backbone of data, and he was captivated by the sharpness of my mind before he ever noticed the curve of my waist. But the public didn't see that. They saw the age gap. They saw the diamond on my finger that could have funded a small country's education system for a year. They saw me stepping out of a chauffeured Rolls-Royce and assumed I had paid for it with a smile and a batting of my eyelashes. The media, with their insatiable appetite for a scandal, painted me as a cunning social climber. The Pennsylvania gold digger, they dubbed me, a moniker that followed me like a branded scar. The worst of it came from Arthur's children. Marcus and Elena Vance were the products of his first marriage, a marriage that had ended tragically with the death of their mother, Victoria, from cancer. They were adults in their late 30s with lives and careers of their own, but they viewed me as an interloper, a viper in their nest. The resentment was palpable, a thick fog that settled over every family gathering. They were polite, of course, in that sharp, glassy way of the ultra-wealthy. Their smiles were thin, their words laced with double meanings. Elena, a brittle socialite with a perpetual sneer, would make pointed comments about new money and the transient nature of certain relationships. Marcus, a sharp-featured lawyer with a ruthless streak, would question my understanding of the family legacy, treating me like a temporary employee who needed to be kept in her place. "It's lovely that you're so interested in the foundation, Amelia," Elena would say, her voice dripping with honeyed venom at a charity board meeting. "It's a bit complex, though. I'm sure Arthur appreciates you taking on a decorative role." The insinuation was always there. I was spending their inheritance. I was a parasite. I was a beautiful, fleeting distraction for a lonely old man who had lost his way. One evening, just before our second anniversary, it all came to a head. Arthur was away on business in Singapore, and Marcus and Elena had invited me to the family estate in the Hamptons. They claimed it was a family check-in, but I knew better. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. I could feel them closing in like wolves around a wounded deer. We were seated in the grand parlour, a room filled with priceless antiques and the weight of generations of Vance history. Elena swirled a glass of Chardonnay, her eyes fixed on the diamond on my finger. "It's quite breathtaking, isn't it?" she mused, not for the first time. "It was my mother, you know, before he had it reset for you." "I know, Elena," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the irritation I felt. "Arthur and I discussed it. He wanted me to have something that was part of the family history." "Family history," Marcus scoffed, leaning forward in his leather armchair. "You're not part of the family history, Amelia. You're a chapter in an epilogue, a footnote." I placed my teacup down on the saucer with a soft, deliberate click. "Why don't you just say what you're both thinking, Marcus?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "Stop dancing around it." Elena's smile vanished. "Fine," she spat, her composure cracking. "We think you're a gold digger. We think you married our father for his money, and we are not going to stand by and watch you squander everything our mother helped him build. We know the type. Your family wasn't exactly equipped to provide this lifestyle. You came from nothing. You worked at a diner and lived in a studio apartment, and now you're dripping in Cartier and vacationing in the Maldives. It's a classic story, isn't it? Except we're not as stupid as the rest of the world." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. They had done their research. They thought they knew everything. They thought they had the winning argument, the final blow that would reveal me for the fraud I was. A decade ago, that accusation might have cut me to the quick. It would have reduced me to tears, made me feel small and unworthy. But I was no longer that girl. I was no longer the scrappy, terrified teenager who had watched her parents' gas station burn to the ground, taking their lives and her entire world with it. I had spent years clawing my way out of that rubble, using grief as fuel and intelligence as my only weapon. "You think you know me," I said, my voice carrying a chill that matched the coldness in their eyes. "You think you have my story figured out, a poor little girl from a dead-end town, finally hitting the jackpot." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "You have it completely wrong." I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply stood up from my chair, walked over to the grand piano where I had left my handbag and retrieved my phone. With a few taps, I pulled up my banking app, a premium account meant for high-net-worth individuals. It was an app they would never recognize, one with a sleek, minimalist interface designed for billions. I held the screen up for them to see. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. They squinted at the screen. The number at the bottom of the page was a sprawling string of digits. A staggering, awe-inspiring number, a number so large it was hard for the average mind to even process, a balance of $1.7 billion. Marcus's face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Elena's sneer vanished, replaced by a look of utter, incredulous shock. Her hand trembled and she set her wine glass down before she dropped it. That's not possible," she stammered. "It's a fake, a mock-up, you're playing some kind of game." "It's not a fake, Elena," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "It is the balance of an inheritance from my own parents, an inheritance I had no idea existed until I was 23. I took a slow breath, savoring the moment. For years I had held this secret close to my chest, a steel shield against the world's assumptions. I had lived with the whispers, the nasty looks, the accusations, all while knowing the truth. But I had let Arthur's children push me too far. Parents were not just the owners of a small-town gas station, I explained, my voice cool and precise. They were the silent majority shareholders in a mid-sized energy company that was poised to revolutionize the fracking industry. They invested their life savings into the research and development of a specific extraction technology. When they died, the company was in its infancy. It was a struggling business that was about to go under. They were working every hour God sent to keep it afloat. That is why they were on the road the night of the accident. They were driving back from a meeting with potential investors. I paused, letting them digest this. The company was bought out 18 months later by a much larger conglomerate. The terms of the deal were structured in such a way that the initial, seemingly worthless shares my parents held suddenly became incredibly valuable. The buyout was for billions, but I was a grieving teenager who had just been told my parents had left me a box full of meaningless stock certificates and a mountain of debt. The lawyers couldn't track me down for years. I'd moved around, changed my name slightly in a clerical error I never bothered to fix, cut off from my old life. I had no idea what they were trying to tell me. I didn't even know what a shareholder was. When they finally found me, I was living on instant noodles, working as a waitress, trying to put myself through community college. The payout was enormous. I didn't know what to do with it. I did what any sensible person would do. I put it in the bank. Then I hired a financial team, a good one. I paid off my parents' debts, set up a few scholarships in their names, and I went back to school. I got a degree in finance and economics. I didn't want to just have money. I wanted to know how to build it. And I did. The truth was even more layered than that. I had taken my billion-dollar inheritance and turned it into $1.7 billion through careful investments, tech startups, and real estate. I had a portfolio that made most hedge fund managers weep with envy. I was a silent partner in companies that Arthur was actually investing in, using a holding company with an unassuming name. I had been independently wealthy for years, and I had never once touched a dime of Arthur's money. "I paid for our wedding, Elena," I said, my tone flat. "In full. The venue, the catering, the dress, the flowers, everything, every cent. Arthur gave me the option, but I told him I wanted to contribute. It was a gift to him, not the other way around. Our house in the city, I put the down payment on it as an engagement present. The vacation home in Tuscany, mine. The car I drive, I bought it myself. Your father pays for our dinners and his own suits. That is the extent of his financial burden regarding me." Marcus was staring at the floor, his face a mask of humiliation. He was a lawyer. He was used to being the smartest person in the room. He had just been outmaneuvered not by a cunning adversary but by his own prejudice. You're richer than us," Elena whispered, the words seeming to choke her. "You're richer than father." "I don't know," I said with a shrug. "I haven't compared our portfolios. It's a bit of a vulgar conversation, don't you think? I've never really cared about rich versus richer." The point is, I don't need your father's money. I never did. I didn't marry him for his money. I didn't marry him for his legacy or his name. I married him because he is one of the few people in my life who saw me. Not the money, not the grief, not the survivor's story. He saw me. He was kind to me when I was a nobody. He encouraged my work and challenged my mind. He didn't know about my money, not really. He knew I was comfortable, but he didn't know the full extent because it didn't matter to him. And that's why I love him. That's why I married him. Silence in the room was profound. The only sound was the ticking of an antique grandfather clock and the distant crash of waves against the shore. I wasn't done. I walked back to my chair and sat down, smoothing my skirt. I fixed my gaze on Marcus and Elena. They had expected a fight, a tearful denial, or a frantic defense. Instead, they got the truth, delivered with a surgical precision that cut deeper than any insult. I could have shown you this balance sheet the first time you called me a gold digger, I continued. But I didn't. I wanted to see how you would behave. I wanted to see if your love for your father was greater than your hatred for me. I wanted to see if the decency I always believed ran in this family would eventually surface. And here we are, I said with a sigh that was heavy with disappointment. 2 years and all you see is a threat to your inheritance. 2 years and you never once tried to get to know me. Not as a person, but as the woman who makes your father happy for the first time since your mother died. I have spent every Christmas, every birthday, every family dinner, and every crisis being the bigger person. I have supported your father through his health scares, his business deals, his insecurities. I have been a partner to him in every sense of the word. And what have you been? A pair of vultures circling a carcass that isn't even dead yet. Welled in Elena's eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation. She was not used to being on the receiving end of a lecture. Marcus just looked tired, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow regret. Is this why you sold our shares in the tech company, Marcus? I asked, feigning curiosity. I noticed that. I was wondering why you'd offload a stock that had such a promising future, but you didn't need the money, did you? You did it because you suspected I was involved and you wanted to hurt me financially. His head snapped up, a fresh wave of shock in his eyes. I had found his secret. He had, in a fit of pique, sold a significant amount of family stock in a company he knew I was quietly invested in, only to watch it skyrocket in value a month later. The loss was his, not mine. I didn't know, he stammered. Of course you didn't, I said. Because you never asked, you just assumed. We were wrong, Emilia, Marcus finally muttered, the words sounding as if they were being ripped from him. We were wrong about you. I looked at them, this man and woman who had made my life a quiet hell, and for a moment I felt nothing but pity. They were products of their environment, raised in a bubble of wealth and privilege where the only currency was money. They had never learned the value of kindness, of loyalty, of love. They were emotional paupers, and no amount of money could fix that. I said, you were. But I'm not going to stand here and gloat. That's not who I am. I'm not going to rub your faces in it. I have a life to live, a husband I adore, and a heart that is far too full of the world to be filled with petty vengeance. I took a deep breath. The question isn't about my bank account, Marcus and Elena. The question isn't about who has more money. The question is about grace. Is there any in here? Or have you been so blinded by your greed and your prejudice that you can't even see the woman who has been trying to be a part of this family? I had spoken my truth, but deep down I knew it changed nothing. They weren't ready to hear it. Their pride was a fortress that no single revelation could breach. I didn't leave that night. I stayed in the guest wing, the same one I'd always been given, a beautiful room with a sea view and a massive fireplace. I slept soundly, the weight of years finally lifting from my shoulders. I had spoken the words I'd held inside for so long. The truth was out, and it was more powerful than any accusation they could ever level at me again. When I went downstairs for breakfast the next morning, Marcus was already there. He was standing by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand, staring out at the ocean. He didn't turn when he heard me enter. Good morning, Emilia, he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Good morning, Marcus. He took a sip of his coffee and then finally turned to face me. He looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red-rimmed and there was a vulnerability in them that I had never seen before. I have a proposal for you, he said. I raised an eyebrow. A proposal? Last night you spoke of grace, he continued, and you asked if there was any in here. I've been thinking about that all night, and I realized no, there hasn't been any grace or generosity from me and Elena since the day you walked into our father's life, and the reason is simple. We were afraid. Afraid of what? I asked, genuinely curious. Afraid of losing him, he admitted, the words sounding painful to utter. Our mother was the center of our world. When she died, it was just Dad, Elena, and me. We created this impenetrable unit. We were all we had, and then he met you and he started to heal. He started to laugh again, he started to enjoy life, and we saw that as a betrayal. We saw you as a replacement, not a supplement, and we pushed you away because we couldn't stand the thought of someone else being important to him, of someone else taking our mother's place. I nodded. I had always suspected this was the root of it. I never wanted to replace your mother, Marcus. I never even met her. I could never compete with a ghost. I just wanted to be part of your father's life, and I wanted to be a friend to you and Alina, that was all. I know that now, he said, his voice thick. I spent all night looking into your background, not in the way I did before looking for dirt. I looked at the real you, I read about the scholarships you set up. I looked at the charities you've helped. I looked at the way you've handled your wealth. You've created more opportunities for more people than any of us ever have. You worked for what you have and you did it in the shadows without a single press release or PR stunt. That takes a kind of humility I didn't think existed in this world. He took a deep breath. So I have a proposal. I want to start over. I know Alina is still too stubborn to see reason. She's hiding in her room, convinced you're still playing some long con, but I'm not. I see it now. You're not the gold digger, you're the rock, and I'm sorry it took us so long to see that. I had expected anger, maybe a truce of silence. I had not expected this. A genuine, if clumsy, olive branch. Apology accepted, I said softly, the words feeling more powerful than I anticipated. And about Alina, give her time, and maybe one day when she's ready you can tell her what you've just told me. Nodded, and there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He extended his hand to me. I took it, and for the first time it wasn't a formal, cold gesture of a stranger. It was a handshake of two allies. As I sat down for breakfast, the headlines on my tablet flashed. Vance gold digger scandal deepens, one read. Emilia Vance seen at estate, are the children feuding, another blared. I ignored them, scrolling instead to a financial news site. There at the top of the page was a story about my biggest charitable foundation, praising its work on poverty alleviation. The byline wasn't about the Vance name. It was about the good that was being done. That was what mattered. Later that week I was hosting a small dinner party at our penthouse for my friends from the university, economists, professors, a few tech entrepreneurs. Arthur was there, of course, beaming with pride. And to everyone's surprise, Marcus and Alina were there too. Alina was stiff and cold for the first half hour, but she began to thaw when she saw how my friends interacted with me. They weren't sycophants or social climbers. They were genuine friends, people who respected my mind, not my wallet. One of my friends, a professor named Dr. Anya Sharma, was telling an animated story about our days as graduate students. I remember Emilia, she was saying, laughing. She used to show up to class in thread,